from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Nick Harris, kind enough to join us this morning. Why did you allow Bobby Belt to be your roommate for the night?
Yeah, why not, right? And I get to wake up to him talking about Avril Lavigne. I thought I was having a fever dream or something earlier. I was like, what's going on here?
No, he did. I asked him. I said, so, okay, you've been awake, right? I've been talking too loud. And he said, no, you texting and asking if I wanted to come on as I rolled over. That woke me up. So he did sleep through this entire first hour and a half of the show of me yelling.
Nick, you're an instant sleeper just like that. Is that every night, or this was just like a special occasion yesterday? And can you instantly sleep on planes?
No, if I am moving, I cannot sleep. But if I'm still, I can sleep on this table right here. Like, I'm good. Like, I can sleep anywhere, everywhere. I just have to be still. But, no, planes and me do not get along when it comes to sleep, unfortunately.
All right, so the last time you kind of gathered with these important NFL people was at the Super Bowl in San Francisco. Got to retell your story that you wrote about in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram about the drink with Jerry Jones.
Yeah, so it was myself and a couple of reporters got invited to talk to Jerry. It was the Friday before the Super Bowl. He had just landed, this was the Thursday. He had just landed in San Francisco, and he had about 20, 30 minutes, and he was like, hey, why don't y'all meet me in the hotel bar here in about a half hour? And we're like, hell yeah, that sounds great. So we meet him in the hotel bar, and I don't drink. I haven't my entire life, and so everyone's ordering drinks around the table of the reporters and Jerry and the PR head, Tad Carper, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, all right, I can't order a Sprite here. I can't look like a jackass. So I whisper over to I tell the waiter, I'm like, hey, give me an old fashioned. Like, I scream it. And then I pull him closer. I was like, hey, man, I don't drink. So, like, make me look good here. And he's like, oh, I got you. Don't worry about it. I was like, okay, cool. So, we start talking, whatever. And then he starts bringing around the drinks, and I see an old fashioned. I see Jerry's Johnny Walker Blue. I see a draft beer, and I see this pink drink. I mean, it couldn't looked more feminine than in that moment, and it may as well, he may as well just put an umbrella coming out of it too. I mean, it looked really bad. And so I looked at him, and then he looked at me, and I was like, all right. And then I looked at Jerry, and Jerry definitely saw me with the drink, and I could just think in the back of his head, he was like, these damn journalists and their goofy drinks.
But that is a cool drink in San Francisco.
Yeah, one could sell.
No. So was it like totally different, Jerry? We've never been in that environment with him other than the media party in Malibu. Like, that's the dream setup for me, to sit there and having drinks with Jerry Jones. Or was it kind of normal Jerry talking to the media?
No, he was definitely more open. I think if we had gotten him this time last year, though, when there were a bit more buzz topics, he probably would have been able to let loose on a few more things. But this year, there's not really that many buzz topics. It's George Pickens. I mean, that's going to be the biggest one that we talk about throughout the offseason. And then how are they going to approach free agency? And I thought he gave good answers on both. But the biggest thing that I took away from that conversation was, during the season last year, it was midway through the year, he said that he took a huge, broad look at this entire thing and how they've been operating over the course of not only the past year, but over the course of the past half decade to full decade. And he was like, how I've been doing things can't be how I do things moving forward. He said, if I don't change, I'm not successful. And so those quotes are sticking in my mind as we move forward into the offseason. And we got a chance to talk to Stephen Jones when we touched down in Indianapolis yesterday. And I asked him, I was like, hey, he said this in San Francisco. Where have you seen that manifest the most? And he's like, well, it's early, but we just hired a defensive staff that averages 36 years old as their age for the entire staff, all 9 assistants. He's like, that is not something we would have done in the past, whether it be hiring a 34-year-old defensive coordinator and then putting a bunch of young guys around him. We've wanted experience before, but now we want the young, bright minds. We want to see what that gives us. And so that's the first place it's manifesting. I wonder if it manifests in free agency or personnel acquisition at all. I think that's going to be the big question, but that was probably the biggest thing that I took out of that conversation.
Nick Harris, Fort Worth Star-Telegram, joining us here on the D&M Leasing Hotline, on the Fan Cam, Twitch, and YouTube here on Shan and RJ. Do you think that the Micah drama will help or benefit George Pickens' negotiation, Nick?
Yeah, I think it's too different. I think it's an apples to oranges comparison, just because they are two completely different negotiations. The only similarity that you're going to find here is that you're working with similar agents, and David Mulligett is the big one, right? But also Trayvon Smith is heavily involved in this ordeal as well, whereas he wasn't necessarily with Micah Parsons. But you're talking a different position. It's not a guy who was a first-round pick, so we don't have the fifth-year option to refer back to during this entire thing. Franchise tag is going to be used in this situation, whereas Micah Parsons still had a whole year before that was going to push to a reality. I think the only other similarity we could run into is the fact that George Pickens could get traded. And, I trust Ian Rappaport's reporting quite a bit. I think he does a fantastic job. And I was telling Bobby yesterday, I was like, I'll tell you what, man, Ian Rappaport continues to mention in all of these George Pickens reports, hey, it is a possibility he still gets traded at the end of the day. He's not leading with it. He's not saying, hey, Cowboys expected to trade George Pickens. But every time he's like, hey, man, just make sure that you mention that this is on the table. I think it's notable for sure. And I think he's going to be on y'all's airwaves later, correct?
I think Bobby is going to have him set up for tomorrow. Bobby and brought us with the sit-down with Rappaport that we will air tomorrow. Thank you for the professional radio tease.
Nick, do you think it's as simple with them and George as they have a number, and if it goes above that number, they're going to look to trade, and if it's below that number, they'll continue negotiations? Do you think it's that cut and dry, that simple?
I don't. I think if you look at, and I put out a tweet yesterday that kind of balances where George Pickens' production has been versus where he maybe could get paid at the end of the day. Since he entered the league in 2022, he is 8th in receiving yards across the NFL. And of the 7 receivers that are above him, all have received extensions, and at the time of signing, they were all in the top 5 of average per year. And so using that same kind of logic, is George Pickens going to land a contract that lands him in the top 5 of average per year? And if he does, that floor is $32.5 million. That's where Garrett Wilson and the New York Jets sits right now. It really comes down to how comfortable are the Cowboys with a long-term deal with George Pickens. I think if there were no off-the-field concerns at all, I think this would be cut and dry. But while the Cowboys do have a higher tolerance for a lot of the things that pushed him out of Pittsburgh and got him traded to Dallas to begin with, I still think about, okay, maybe another year, another type of prove it year, quote unquote, on the franchise tag could be beneficial for the Cowboys to kind of evaluate the whole thing before committing to him long term. I think that's the biggest nuance that you're dealing with in this negotiation, not necessarily the price point. I think if they feel comfortable and they wake up one day and they're like, you know what, we're going to go ahead and get this thing done long term, I don't think the money and whatever that price point is necessarily will get in the way.
Nick Harris from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram joining us here on 105 through the Fan. Okay, so we are out here for the Combine. There's still draft stuff going on. I know there's a big free agency focus, but obviously 2 first-round picks for the Cowboys, a nice advantageous position to be in, but they don't have those day 2 picks. Walking into this weekend, before we start hearing all the buzz coming out about meetings and stuff like that, if you were to just say, hey, I think one of these guys ends up being a Cowboy with one of those 2 picks, who is it, and how would that player fit into the team in 2026?
Yeah, I've been leaning more toward Mansoor Delane, the corner out of LSU, quite a bit. I've just loved his game, too, going back to his time at Virginia Tech even. And he was recruited by secondary coach Ryan Smith, who's now with the Cowboys. He was recruited by him to go to Virginia Tech, so there's experience there with Mansoor. And then his experience at LSU, just a lockdown corner. He's got the measurables. He's got the traits. He can play man. He can play zone. He's versatile. He can step up and play the run. I think it's just a guy that has proven versatility as well. I don't know if he necessarily has slot versatility, which that would probably be the big question if you are drafting a corner there. But Mansoor Delane makes so much sense at 12. The Caleb Downs dream, of course, you would love to keep that going. I just don't see how he slips to 12. And I'm starting to feel that way about Sonny Styles, the linebacker out of Ohio State as well. So, I feel like if Sonny Styles or Caleb Downs are somehow one of those guys there, I think they swing on that pick. But if not, I think Mansoor Delane is a phenomenal consolation prize if you stick and pick at 12.
I'm glad you brought up those 2, Styles and Downs, because that's where I wanted to go next. So let's start with Styles. Sonny Styles is the name that has been most commonly mocked to the Cowboys at 12 over the last couple months. there's some buzz that he might go a little bit higher now. But just explain his game, what he's all about. Former safety who transitioned to linebacker. Talk about Sonny Styles and what the Cowboys would be getting with him.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the former safety because you see those traits and instincts in the second level, and he's a huge presence in that second level. He's 6'4", 245 pounds. I mean, he looks like damn near an edge rusher walking off the bus, but he has so much hip dexterity, and he can flip around and cover guys man to man. He can cover zones and guys that are trailing across the middle of the field. He can step up and play the run. He did not have a missed tackle last season until the very final game of the year for Ohio State. Wow. Now, granted, he had 2 in that game in the Cotton Bowl that they lost against Miami, but he's a short tackler. He can step up and play in these guys, and he's been the lead communicator for Ohio State the last 2 seasons. And so that's a huge thing, too, because if you do not go out and get a veteran that can man the communication aspect of things for Christian Parker on the field, then you have to get a damn good player there at either 12 or 20 that you feel comfortable in doing so. And Sonny Styles can certainly be that guy. And so I'm a huge Sonny Styles guy. I think when it comes to being a true off-ball linebacker, he's the best we've seen in the draft class in probably a half decade.
And on downs specifically, we played the clip last week. Daniel Jeremiah tapping the brakes a little bit on him. Not aggressively so, but DJ just kind of saying, I think he's a good player. I think he's a solid player, but he's a tough evaluation for me. He doesn't pop. Like I don't see the star player that everybody's talking about. What have you thought about Caleb Downs, and do you kind of get what DJ's getting out with that?
Yeah, I understand because safety is such a tricky position, right? And I do not agree. I think Caleb Downs, when it comes to being a true defender, what position does he play? Does he play safety? Does he play linebacker? Does he play slot? He plays FBP. He plays football player, and sometimes he plays MFFBP. And so he's a guy that I think you can play anywhere. And I think day one he would be a slot starter for this team, for the Cowboys, and he can play in the box and man up against tight ends and give you that versatility. But also he's just a smart, instinctual football player. And that's a guy who I am very confident. If I had to pick, 5 guys in this draft class that I think will have double-digit year careers, Caleb Downs would be my first draft pick off the board for that.
Now, when you look at we talk about Downs, we talk about Sonny Styles. You're a big fan of Mansoor Delane. There was talk yesterday. I know Steven had discussed the possibility of maybe moving some of those picks or obviously changing up some of their position. What do you think would be the most likely way to try to pick up extra capital? Would it be trading down from 12? Would it be trading down from 20? Would they potentially look at just packaging and going up if they really like Caleb Downs that much?
Yeah, I think if they were to acquire more capital, I would say trade back from 12 because we've seen we look at all these mock drafts and we look at all these teams that are ahead of the Cowboys that are trying to pick up defensive help. And sometimes there's some scenarios where the Cowboys are kind of wiped out there at 12. And, there might still be a team trying to jump up to 12 to go ahead and get Ty Simpson if he has a huge combine week. Hey, if you're a Dallas Cowboys fan and you're rooting for your favorite defender to slip to 12, you need to be rooting for Ty Simpson to have a phenomenal week, and you need to be rooting for all 3 of these receivers to have a phenomenal week: Mekhi Lemon, Carnell Tate, and Jordan Tyson. Now, Jordan Tyson isn't competing this week, but you need to continue to root for him in the draft process because the more guys that go in the top 12 out of that group, the more some of these premier defenders start to slip down. But until that happens, there's likely scenarios that the Cowboys are wiped out of the elite talent whenever they get to 12. Maybe pushing back to 16 and picking up a second round or a third round pick could heavily benefit them in this situation.
Nick Harris, Forward Star Telegram here on The Fan. What is and what time is your weirdest meeting that you have set up out there in Indy?
I'm an on-the-fly type guy because if I set anything in stone, I'll miss it out here because I tried that a couple times last year. I'd be like, okay, at 10:45, I need to make sure to be here, and then I would be having a phenomenal conversation with somebody. And I was like, I have to abandon this. Why did I do this to myself? And so I'm an on-the-fly, by my jeans type of dude out here for sure.
So what different times do you think you'll be going to sleep?
I told Bobby when we flew out here, I was like, if I'm averaging more than 3 hours of sleep per night out here, I'm doing it wrong.
Listen to that Forward Star Telegram. That is how you hire your Cowboys insider. Thank you for letting Bobby crash, waking up with us, and we will see you in a few hours. Thank you, brother.
Yeah, y'all be safe. Safe travels.
Nick Harris, Forward Star Telegram, brought to you by Yorgi Pet Care Connectors, East Dallas Diesel, and the On Time Expert.